Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fiction Room. Today's writing prompt comes to us from username Creepy Uncle Dead. The prompt is, humans are the first sentience, putting us millennia ahead of aliens. Instead of acting like an elder species should, we create mysterious objects with no actual use, crop circles, and send spooky messages like, "Be quiet, you are in danger," to the aliens, because we are still childish morons. Our first story today is written by Cobra Kai 1986.
Zuth had believed in aliens for as long as he could remember. Theories of them had been around for decades, of course. But only with recent advances in radio telescopes had their existence been all but proven. The first patterns came through just 50 solar cycles ago. 26 unique patterns. A codex? A language? A password? Scholars had puzzled over the patterns for decades. Some argue that they were simply binary stars in eccentric orbits, but this held little weight when the repetition of the pattern continued unabated with no error or eccentricity. Then, 30 years, a breakthrough. A message left overnight in rural Ruinth, in the middle of a large, flat Taurus field. The symbols meant nothing by themselves and could have been explained by local pranksters. But soon, other similar but definably different messages appeared across the globe. That, as we say, was all there needed to be. Soon the patterns became linked to the shapes and a language was born. A method of communication. The problem, the truly infuriating thing, the thing that really, really frustrates the minds, is that we are not still advanced enough to send up our own response. Where would we even send it to? And how long would it take to arrive? Would this mega species still exist? Would they still care? Well, yes, they would, and we can prove it. Just 5 short solar cycles ago, a message came through, as if answering our cries of impatience with omnipotent clarity. The message is repeated hourly and has permeated our culture. It drives us. It helps us retain our ambition and our scope. We repeat it as a mantra hourly, a planetary obsession, if you will. We know they will wait for us. They have told us as much. For they tell us, and we tell ourselves, never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down.
Our second story today is written by Science and Pasta. He felt nothing but terror at the tiny words on the screen in front of him, printed in simple, blocked characters. Be quiet. They'll hear you. His crest stood on end, wings folding nervously into his chest. Surely this was a jest, a joke, some kind of galactic conspiracy. A stray message in some invisible stream of messages. A second message appeared on the screen, then a third and a fourth, more messages coming quicker than he could read them. What sort of creature communicated this fast?
What do you mean I accidentally broadcasted to the primitive world?
Oh no. I need to make him an excuse to UW about this.
Let's just say it's a prank.
Yes, a prank.
Yes, you're right. Our cover is already blown. Let's go all the way. No, nothing like a nuke or a CD bridge. Let's give them genetic engineering.
The next message was not a text message. It was an incredibly dense file, so big that it took up a full 30% of the supercomputer he used. He raised a dull claw, and with a heavy dread wrestling with the butterflies in his stomach, he clicked to open the file. It wasn't just proofs and theories, not just clear and understandable blueprints for complex and unknown machines. It was also a picture of his people's genome. He moved the cursor over the genome, and part of it sprang up, describing in detail all of the functions of whatever random gene he had selected. He trembled with terrible conflict before shaking his head and reaching over to his phone. There were a few calls he had to make. Our third story today is written by Slave to Insurance. Flee. They are coming. That was the message broadcast to the world in complex repeating binary 100 years ago. It took that long for scientists to recognize that it was a signal among all the noise, and actually realize that the amount of energy necessary for it to be noticeable meant that someone either very technologically advanced or very specifically interested in us wanted us to know. Whatever the reason was, once we realized the significance of that, we also realized that the implications sounded dire. That was 75 years ago. That was when the first Ark ships were drafted. When we were nervous, but we still had hope. The plan was everyone to be moved off-world and to the nearest star, in hopes that we would sidestep whatever threat was headed our way. As a species, we had never accomplished anything even remotely like this before, having only made some nascent colonies on the nearest planetary bodies. It required experimental technology and an unprecedented amount of cooperation, but it was worth it for the species. 40 years ago, 5 lights winked into the night sky in the southern hemisphere. Telescopes trained on them found them to be a brilliant blue-violet, so bright they were almost painful to look at. The scientific community erupted into debate. Governments tried their best to keep the panic low, but a growing contingent of scientists were arguing that the blue shift of the objects put them at impossibly fast speeds towards us, and the timetable on the arcs had to be pushed up. The tension on the planet was like a pot about to boil over. Most governments were still working, doing their parts to ensure our survival. Some nations were having problems, though. Society's scars showed themselves again, as previous enemies fell back into old habits with infighting and hate crimes. So much of the world was focused on the Arks that there were precious few extra supplies to keep everyone else insulated from the hatred and violence of others. All throughout the fear, the lights in the night sky slowly shone brighter. Even the oblivious among us could not deny that the formation the lights were in bore a striking resemblance to the necklace worn by Savik, an ancient, shape-shifting goddess of destruction. It would have been a coincidence for most, had it not been for the fact that she is recognized in lore by the necklace she wears, no matter her form. Slowly, we lost more across the world to the old religions, as they abandoned their work on the Ark and began to accept their demise in fervent prayer. 10 years ago, the first of the Ark ships were completed. The world rejoiced, but only for a moment. Somebody, either foolish or noble, depending on who you ask, could not keep the secret any longer and revealed to the world that these would not only be the first, but the last of the ships. There were no plans to build any more, because there was no time. The barely restrained chaos could no longer be controlled. The world erupted into brutal war, as people fought desperately to secure a coveted spot on one of the Arks. More blood was shed, and atrocities were committed in the name of survival than had occurred in the previous 2 centuries. Families, neighborhoods, cities, entire nations tore themselves and each other apart, sometimes literally. The Ark ships launched in desperation, most only partially full. Some of the more fanatical of Savik's worshippers managed to sneak onto one of the Arks and detonated it in the air, convinced that escape was tantamount to heresy in the wake of her purifying light. Millions of lives were lost in an instant. 5 years ago, all semblance of the world we had once knew had disappeared entirely, as the last nation gave up the pretense of self-governance and collapsed. Our world was nothing but brutal and fearful tribes, cut off from contact with one another. I survived only by keeping my head down and scavenging what I could in the cities. A year ago, I lost the last connection to my old life. My son died in my arms after we accidentally scared another group of scavengers. I watched the life leave his eyes as he bled into the street, the assailants running off into the night. Nothing about my life is the same as it was 100 years ago. I curse the message for its omen, as I would have preferred to live out the last century in peace with my family, instead of in fear. I curse myself too, because I cannot bring myself to end my own life. I simply exist, sometimes in a state of acute bitterness, but mostly I am numb. 1 hour ago, the lights entered our atmosphere, and one of them now hovers above the city. It is clearly a ship, and no one knows what to make of it. Some prostrate themselves and mumble blessings feverishly. Some hold friends and family close. Some hide in the ruined buildings and cover their eyes. Some, like me, just stare. I try to keep impassive, but I cannot help but feel my heart flutter. Could this be the end I am finally looking for? Could I finally be at peace? The idea is almost too much to bear. The ship, after hanging still for so long, suddenly begins to shift. Surfaces on it unseal and change. The whole thing opens like some sort of twisted flower pointed towards us. A light appears on the bottom, and a huge roar fills the air as the light crackles with angry energy. I feel the hair on my body stand up on end, and I close my eyes, the faintest smile playing on my lips. The roar becomes deafening, drowning out the panicked wailing and ululating from us below. I tilt my head towards the sky, and the light sears through my eyelids. I am ready. But nothing comes. Instead, a small sound played like someone passing wind, and the flower opened up to reveal colored stripes and squares of paper as they flooded to the ground. A strange figure stood there on the ship in a suit, convulsing and making a strange barking noise at us before speaking in a guttural language. It paused, fiddling with some controls on the suit, still barking and convulsing. Suddenly it was speaking our language.
Oh my God!
It said, doubled over between barks.
You should have seen the looks on your faces.
It took a while before it stopped barking, and then longer still before it stopped convulsing and stood up straight. Then it cowered in mock fear and went into another round of shaking. Eventually it stopped that too and looked out at us.
Well,
It said finally, gesturing at the whole scene laid before it.
good luck with all this.
And with that, it left. Thanks again for listening to The Fiction Room. If you like what you heard, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really does help us. But for now, stay safe out there, everyone. See you next time.